Welcome to part 3 of Ethics 201 Lecture 8, in which we're looking at the relationship between business ethics, corporate social responsibility, and human talent. This part deals with objectives 5 and 6. Objective 5 is about discrimination, and objective 6 is just a brief look at the role of unions in ensuring an ethical workplace. I want to emphasise that a more detailed coverage of this and objectives 2 and 3 is in the panel discussions that I have posted from Law Help on the Moodle website. I want to also remind you about the Quanda video, the Q&A video, which deals with master chef wages theft, celebrity chefs and wages theft, but a range of other issues in the employment relationship in a discussion from Q&A, an episode from the middle of last year, the middle of 2019, which performs useful background not only for this week's topic, this module, but also may provide you with some information to assist you in your main assignment, your group assignment, which you're completing at the moment. So, Objective 5, identify and describe the ethical issues associated with discrimination against women, comparable worth, and sexual harassment. So, job discrimination occurs when an employment decision harms or disadvantages an employee or a job applicant, where the decision is based not on their knowledge, not on their skill, not on their abilities, not on a real examination of cultural fit within the organisational culture or some other unrepresentative description of culture in the organisation, but based on a person's particular membership of a group, that they're gay, that they're transgender, that they are an immigrant, that they are a refugee, that they are a woman, etc., etc. And when these decisions rest on prejudice or false stereotypes or negative assumptions about the nature of that person, that they're too old to do the job, that they're too young to do the job, that they won't fit in our organisation for some spurious reason, that's what job discrimination is, and it is unethical. Discrimination can occur intentionally, explicit discrimination against people that fit within a particular group, or unconsciously owing to our cultural differences and our misunderstandings as a result of an individual operating on unfounded assumptions about others. So conscious bias and unconscious bias. Some of the types of conscious and unconscious bias that affect women are these: gender stereotyping, sexist assumptions, women's place in the family demands work considerations, they lack the drive to succeed, they take criticisms personally, they are too emotional to be good managers, they take more sick days because they menstruate. All these things are assumptions and that are not based, they're misogynist assumptions that are not based on the reality of a modern workforce, a modern society. They're not based on reality. The second issue we've got is the issue of comparative worth. That when women dominate a certain occupation, that occupation often pays less. So nursing and teaching, sometimes called pink collar professions, nursing and teaching, which are two entry-level professions that are dominated by women, that have more women working than men, get paid less than accountants, which is a profession that has traditionally been dominated by men. But it doesn't necessarily have to only apply to professionals. A person working, there is a high tendency for a person in clothing manufacture and footwear manufacture to be female. semi-professional, semi-skilled and skilled roles in those companies get paid less than the equivalent position from someone who's working in, say, metalwork or CNC manufacturing on a production line of a vehicle. It's just the way that historically particular occupations have had more women than men, and therefore the skills necessary to do that job are devalued, and the cost of that job, the occupation, the job is seen as having less comparable worth, and therefore it's paid lower. So you get a discriminatory wage system that has kept women's wages lower than those in male occupations that require similar levels of skill, education, and experience. And to deal with that, one thing you can do is to do what's called the comparative worth program, adjusting women's salary schedules upwards to bring them in line with those of men. The arguments for comparable worth are that equivalent jobs need equal pay and justice demands it. So it's a justice view, an ethical justice view. The arguments against that is that women have chosen freely to be in less demanding roles to fit their lifestyles. Well, this is one of the ones I hate the most. The number of meetings I have had in my previous role, which included responsibility for large programs at a university and the business school, where people would come in and say, well, women like to have casual jobs and only be casual teachers rather than something more secure because they like to get home at 3 o'clock to look after the kids coming home from school. Well, that's not true. Or even if it's true in some cases, it's not a universal truth. The cost of revising salaries is too expensive. Well, that's a silly argument because the cost of losing good quality people because you're not rewarding them properly is far higher than the cost of actually going through a simple HR process, and there's no reliable measurement of what constitutes equivalent jobs. Well, there's lots of things you can't measure reliably. There's lots of things you have to create a measurement factor for. One of my last jobs in the Australian Public Service, I worked at the Joint Australia Public Service Training Council. And my role was to go and interview people in what they called the General Services Officer stream. They'd broadbanded the streams to have 10 levels. The GSO were the people who were not tradespeople, but often technicians. And there was multiple levels in those roles, and they were employed as general services. Some of them were tradespeople, but they were trades and technicians and unskilled workers. That's distinct from the professional stream and the administrative stream. And our whole point of going to interview these people and finding out, these people meaning this group of people that were working as GSOs, across a range of semi-skilled and skilled but not administrative roles, was to come up with a broad banded category of where particular jobs fit against these 10 levels of being a general services officer. It is quite possible to go through and develop equivalencies. Now, there's another argument that overlays that rewards are not necessarily linked to the complexity or status of a job. But that cuts across this. That's irrelevant to this argument because it's not normally made against whether jobs deserve the same pay. It's made to say jobs don't deserve the same pay. Well, they do. Sexual harassment is predominantly, the women are predominantly the victims of sexual harassment, though not exclusively. There are legislation regarding this. One is the quid pro, and two types of sexual harassment is the quid pro quo and the hostile work environment, both of which needs to be considered and managed for a firm to be ethical. You cannot discriminate on the basis of disability, genetics, race, gender, age, social position, religion, sexual orientation, or political affiliation. So the last thing to talk about in this discussion of how human talent relates to business ethics and how business ethics relates to human talent is the role of unions. So Australian trade unions have a long history starting in the 18th century, drawing from the British system. Craft unions and secret societies to equalise the relationship between the employers and employees and to professionalise their crafts. This is where trades come from. This is also where things like architects come from. Some of those other professions as well. Even medical profession ultimately comes from a craft union. In the 1800s, doctors or surgeons were offered also the local butcher or the local barber because there wasn't this structure of professionalism that grew out of craft unions. Some of the achievements in Australia of the union movement have been the 8-hour day, 40-hour week, penalty rates, annual holidays, occupational health and safety, sickness and maternity benefits, and unemployment payments. You could also include the Australian pension scheme as part of that. So, in a positive way, unions will have fraternity, a common sacrifice, individual dignity, non-engineering autonomy, and mutual dependence, and that's the ethos of a well-functioning union. But a union is also an organisation, and therefore organisations may in fact function well, but they also may in fact have organisational politics, organisational goals, and the issues we talked about when we talked about agency theory and the differences between the roles of the managers in the union and the officers in the union and the way they deal with their stakeholders, their members, or the way they deal internally. So just like a union, just like any organisation, unions need to consider the ethical and moral relationships they have with their stakeholders. Just 2 or 3 issues related to union tactics and the ethical and moral implications of union tactics. Sometimes strikes can raise moral questions. A strike to be justifiable, ethically and morally justifiably, we're not talking about legal justification and the Australian workplace rules. There should be just cause, it should be properly authorised, and it should be the last resort. And finally, picketing should be peaceful. Now, as you know, there are restrictions placed on all those things in the Australian industrial relations system. You would have dealt with those in your HR subject. So that's the end of what I wanted to cover in this lecture, noting that there are a number of supporting videos that provide you with examples of issues, provide you with a discussion of wages theft and other issues related to the employment relationship, and the specific 3 videos from Law Help that take you through the Australian legal framework and talk about it both from a legal and a moral a legal perspective, and also from extending that legal perspective into being, well, how you behave, not only in the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law. So, we've identified and described the moral nature of employment relationship. We've identified the rights and obligations. We've identified and described some of the ethical issues related to an organisation's attempts to influence private lives. We've identified and described some of the issues related to the relationship, health, safety, quality of work life, childcare, management conduct, and job discrimination. We specifically talked about discrimination, comparable worth, and sexual harassment. And we've also talked a little bit about trade unions. Now, as I said at the very beginning of part 1, you have an entire course called Human Resource Management. And in that course, the issues that I've dealt with get spread over 13 weeks, and you get the legal basis for those issues as well. In this course, we're just giving a quick review to look at the moral and ethical issues related to these behaviours. Okay, watch the rest of the videos. I'll see you in the tutorial this week. I'll see you in the tutorial next week. Note the forum activity is about one of the cases from the textbook. Bye for now.